So, it is a great pleasure to introduce Professor Roberta de Monticelli. He is a professor of philosophy of the human person here at San Raffaele, and she is also the director of the research center Persona, and also the founder of the online journal Phenomenology and Mind. And today, Roberta de Monticelli is presenting a paper whose title is Haecceity, a Phenomenological Perspective. Please.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you very much to all of you to be still here. I'm sorry, I kept writing and rewriting this paper because I was terribly passionate in these topics. So I'm sorry, I was even a bit late. I'm not sure that I'm coming to a definite conclusion. I hope so anyway. It might be a bit long, so I'll cut, and so we'll see whether we recover things in the discussion. So the focus, can you hear me correctly?
Yeah.
It's too much. The focus of this paper is personal identity, and its purpose is twofold. On one hand, I wish to show, I mean, that's a minor purpose, how much of the neo-Cartesian, I should say, maybe now non-Cartesian spirit of Lynne Baker's theory of personhood can and ought to be shared from a phenomenological point of view. And it's a lot. A precious heritage that Baker had not just revived, but first cast into a faultless logical and ontological form up to modern standards of rigor. On the other hand, and it is the main purpose, I don't feel at ease with the account Lynne gives of personal identity in terms of Haecceity. I'm not sure how I should pronounce that. Do you understand Haecceity, business, more or less? Hecce, heck. Okay. Or rather, I'm not at ease. I don't feel at ease with that reading of Scotto's principle of individuation that has been widely accepted in a late 20th century debate on the metaphysics of modality, from, say, Plantinga to Adams and others. A reading that Lynne Baker seems to share. So I shall try to show that such haecceitistic implications of her ontology miss something essential in the very question about the identity of persons, such as we raise it in the life world, in the everyday world of encounters and ordinary experience, as Lynne would say. This something essential seems to be better accounted for by a different theory of essential individuality, or if you want, of Haecceity, which, by the way, turns out to be more similar to the original pre-Occamian, Occamistic, pre-Occam one. More similar than modern Haecceities could afford. So, now, the thing which seems to be, with which, at the very beginning, I sort of felt a bit uneasy, is the fact that Lynne's theory seems to be a deflationary theory of personal identity. So, in fact, it seems that Lynne claims that what makes a personal identity theory informative is the fact that personhood is accounted in non-personal or naturalized terms. But any account of personhood in non-personal or subpersonal terms misses the essential of personal identity. So an account of personal identity not missing the essential must be circular, must be non-informative. So what the point is? I entirely share the main point, if you want. If what makes personal identity theories informative is that personhood is accounted for in non-personal or naturalized terms, then those theories actually do miss the essential feature of being a person, and a fortiori that of being that person, particular person, one and the same, persisting over time for a while. But I don't share the premise. It is true that all the modern examples of informative theories we know of do understand personhood in non-personal, sorry, I should stay closer to it, in non-personal or subpersonal terms. But I don't think that there is no other way to specify an informative theory of personal theory, so of personal identity, than in non-personal terms. So, which are the reasons of my perplexity? Let me give you a general idea of it. Lynne Baker's theory of personal identity in terms of modern Haecceity is a very brilliant solution of what I could call the crucial puzzle of personal identity. We'll see soon what it is. Yet, it is a solution, if I may so, which is not entirely true to the sense of that puzzle, and in the last end, to the intuitive, pre-philosophical sense of the problem of personal identity, which, by the way, is one of the few philosophical problems which have deep roots in the everyday world and our life in it. It's one of the rare philosophical problems which sound quite intelligible in their naive pre-philosophical understanding. So, to say that in Lynne's language, if I can, her view of personal identity does not seem to take the problem as seriously as a real and crucial question originating from the world of encounters would deserve. That of personal identity is indeed a question belonging par excellence to the metaphysics of everyday life. And Baker's theory of personal identity, I said, is a deflationary theory. I mean that it takes the question to be a deceiving or illusionary question if it asks for an informative answer. Because this expectation is unjustified or unreasonable, a circular answer is all right, a kind of Wittgensteinian therapy for pseudo-problems. But is deflation a right strategy for the metaphysics of everyday life? Shouldn't it try to unravel the implicit, often confused meaning of those basic questions which arise in the life world across all cultures, rather than reduce them to logical or conceptual errors? Shouldn't it clarify the need of information rather than dismissing it as a false need? So, which is this root in the everyday life I'm talking about? Which is the basic question? Well, the basic question is, who am I? Who are you? Who is she or he? In fact, it's a question that we raise all the time, crucial to our lives, values, interests, crucial to ethics, law, politics, friendship, love. And, well, because such a question is so meaningful and so hard, its general meaning cannot be such that the general form of an answer to it turns out to be non-informative or circular. I mean, a view of personal identity, at least for a philosopher taking the life world seriously, should exactly provide us with a better understanding of the general meaning of this basic question. One which would not make the question either hopeless or redundant. It should shed light on the general form of an answer to it, which would be a good answer to this question, who am I? So as to tell us in which direction we are to turn our gaze to search for the answer in particular cases. And it should do so, moreover, in such a way as to explain why that basic question is so hard and so crucial for us, or how is it linked to what is so special about us, about each one of us. So, here is my metaphysical philosophical claim, so to speak. Because such a question is so meaningful and so hard, its general meaning cannot be such that the general form of an answer to it turns out to be non-informative or circular. So, a metaphysics of the everyday life should provide us with a better understanding of the general meaning. One that would not make the question hopeless or redundant, and spelling out the general form of an answer and showing what's crucial. So, at this point I need, anyway, since in my title there was a phenomenological perspective, and short clarification of what is a phenomenological perspective is probably in point here. It is the perspective one has when adopting the phenomenological attitude. And what is the phenomenological attitude? Well, adopting it is imagining, adopting it relative to any object whatsoever, is imagining how that object would appear from an appropriate first personal perspective. So a perceptual one, if it is a perceptual object, an emotionally qualified one, if it is an object of emotional experience, and so on and so on. In short, adopting the phenomenological attitude is putting oneself ideally in the place of the subject of any intentional state, in the Husserlian sense of intentionality, namely the basic subject-object structure of consciousness. So ideally means, of course, by bracketing whatever is contingent upon an actual subject, as this person I am. I want also put forward some caveats. What I'm looking for is no narrative identity theory. The personal identity problem, I completely agree with Lynne, has nothing to do with what is called narrative identity, that in spite of the fact that some so-called phenomenologists, well, Paul Ricoeur is one, and Dan Zahavi is another, in fact, they are phenomenologists, in fact, not so-called. Anyway, I don't think that they are right in pretending that part of a phenomenological theory of personal identity is narrative, is a narrative identity theory. And I also share the other qualifications of our subject put forward by Lynne. The problem is not how we re-identify a person, nor has it to do with psychology, not directly at least. It is a true metaphysical question. So what is it? Traditionally, from Locke on, the problem is, I also I'm quoting this illuminating quotation from Lynne's book. According to Harold Noonan, the problem of personal identity over time is the problem of giving an account of the logically necessary and sufficient condition for a person is an identifier at one time being the same person as a person identified at another time. Okay, now Lynne says that there are complex and simple views of a personal identity. Complex view, well, simple views are simple because they hold personal identity over time to be non-analyzable, as is the self of a Cartesian self-reference. Hence, they cannot give an informative or non-circular criterion of identity, one which does not presuppose that identity. So simple views are typically immaterialist. They tend to identify persons with immaterial minds or souls. Complex views, on the contrary, do specify necessary and sufficient conditions of personal identity over time. For example, persistence of body and brain, or psychological continuity or contiguity of mental states, and so on. Complex views, then, are typically reductionist about persons. That's the price they pay to be informative. Okay, so Lynne's not so simple view. Lynne is on the side of the simple views, but her simple view is not so simple at all. In a way, if I have understood, it is not because a self is something simple and non-analyzable that non-circular conditions of persistence cannot be provided, but because the capacity for a first personal self-reference or a reflective reference of a robust kind is a necessary condition for a person to exist. So, a persistent self, or a reference to it, is, so to speak, embedded in the very definition of personhood. So, well, let's spell out very quickly Baker's identity condition. BIC. Well, okay, you can see it, of course, it's at a moment t, the same person as y at a moment t2, if and only if the state of affair of x exemplifying a first-person perspective is the same state of affair as y exemplifying a first-person perspective. Boiled down, you are a person, you continue to exist as long as your first-person perspective is exemplified. Okay? So I claim that this is a deflationary theory because it accepts circularity not only as inevitable, but as an obvious consequence of an illuminating truth concerning personhood, namely, that the identity of a person across time cannot really be given in third-personal terms. That is, from outside this person's life. For what else is persistence over time for a person if not living her life, making her choices, questioning herself and her choices, also not the perspective is robust, suffering, remorse, and regret, and so on and so on. Okay. Now, well, a small remark. I do agree that there is nothing to discover in subpersonal or in personal terms, for such discoveries would not tell what it is to be me, for example, Lynne. But I claim that third personal speech need not be non-personal or sub-personal, and here is why. So I'm going into the main part. Oh, sorry, that's nothing to... What happens? Oh, I see,
Why?
I think I messed them up. Oh, doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay. Well, the idea was that take the why did I say, in fact, that third personal perspective is not necessarily a sub-personal one. Take a well-known case, an example which is very similar to the one of the messy shopper, a kind of Borgesian library. I am in a library. Suppose I'm amnesiac about what happened to me before last year. And in fact, I live now in another country with a different passport and another name. So, reading in a library, I discover some works by a certain Mrs. RDM, and I find those works extremely exciting, not surprisingly. After having read all I can about RDM and by her, I decided to write a biography of RDM. Now, once finished, what I wrote is a biography, but not an autobiography. It happens to be about myself, but I ignore that it is, and I wrote about myself exactly as I would write about anybody else. So this possible case shows different remarkable things. First of all, that third-personal speech need not be impersonal or sub-personal. A biography is a perfect example of this claim. So that personal identity cannot be construed in sub-personal or non-personal terms does not mean that it can only be given from one's own personal perspective, literally. I'm quite sure that Lynne should agree. While being in third-personal language, a biography cannot help referring to its subject as the subject of a first-personal perspective, exactly as we do when addressing mutually to each other in conversation, understanding others, reporting their deeds and beliefs, investigating the reasons of their choices, is only possible under the assumption that they do have robust first-person perspectives. So this is exactly what rational agency presupposes, as Lynne convincingly shows in that already referred to chapter 8 or 9, I don't remember. So, okay. Now, in fact, there is a part of this example of this Borgesian library that is exactly as the case of the messy shopper. Suppose I discover at a certain moment that I am RDM after all. Of course, I could not discover this fact if I didn't have an independent self-reference, which is irreducible. Of course, RDM is RDM would be a mere tautology and not a shocking discovery. So, in fact, the self-concept is irreducible, or the mere Cartesian reference. Now, what is a self-concept? Am I doing well? Okay. now we can trust Lynne. A self-concept is a formal and not a qualitative concept. Its role is to self-attribute a first-person reference in such a way that the user of a self-concept cannot be mistaken about who she is referring to. So, a second explanation, a self-concept is constitutive of a robust first-person perspective. Okay. But now, if we take, I mean, this case shows that in fact a self-concept is constitutive. I said if I couldn't refer to myself as myself, I couldn't discover that I am Erde. But if we take the other way around, suppose that I never realize that I am RDM. So this shows two things. In this case, I would have an incomplete knowledge of myself, and this is no big deal. In fact, for a phenomenologist, whatever is real is an infinite source of information. So it's obvious that I always have an incomplete knowledge of myself. But there's something worse in this case. Here I have a false belief about my identity. I believe that I'm not RDM, so I do incur in the misidentification error. So what does this case show? Okay, we have already, well, in a way, that's the point of really focusing the crucial puzzle of personal identity. That is, my self-concept does not refer to myself as the particular person I am in fact, even if it refers to myself as myself. So, a self-concept, insofar as it is transparent and absolute, so to speak, as Descartes would like it were, it picks up a homeless self. Insofar as it picks up a particular person, it is no longer transparent. So, what's Lynne's solution of this crucial puzzle? It is clearly giving up transparency. It's clearly an anti-Cartesian solution. She says, I suggest that we dissociate the idea of the first-person perspective from the Cartesian ideas of transparency, infallibility, and logical privacy. And in fact, I think that what she calls the haecceitistic implications of her ontology make this suggestion viable by pinning down each time the referred self to the actual particular person it belongs to in the actual world. So, she does that by means of modern haecceitism, or theory of Haecceity, and what it is, as I said, I mean, she's referring back to relevant work of Plantinga, Adams, and others. We gain in an article, 11th article by Plantinga, following definition of Haecceity, a thisness Haecceity is the property of being identical with a certain particular individual, not the property that we all share of being identical with some individual or other, but my property of being identical with me, your property of being identical with you, etc. These properties have recently been called essences, and here Adams has a caveat, but that is historically unfortunate, for essences have normally been understood to be constituted by qualitative properties, and we are entertaining the possibility of non-qualitative distances. Of course, the property of being the same as RDM is not a qualitative property adding whatsoever to the whatness of RDM. But it's very useful to pin down self-reference. My haecceity is the property of being identical to me, whoever I may be. Okay, your haecceity, the same thing. So, quickly, Lynne's theory of personal identity via a long set of formal passages which I skip, in fact, has this kind of circular appearance. You, a person, continue to exist as long as your first-person perspective is exemplified. So, in a way, we can analyze big as sick plus Nick, namely Baker identity condition, personal identity condition, as a specific identity condition of person plus a numeric identity condition of person. In fact, by this specific identity condition, RDM is a person, if and only if she's a simplified first-person perspective essentially, but by the numeric condition, I am RDM if and only if I and RDM share the Haecceity. So, I go on to the criticism. What's wrong with all that? Nothing is really wrong, as I said. Yet, modern Haecceity is not true to life, that was my claim. Why? It's not true to the sense of the crucial puzzle of personal identity and to the basic question underpinning it. Who am I? When I start wondering that, it's not because I run the risk of mistaking me for you, as I can mistake you for your twin brother. It's because there is much more to my being this particular person than my self-concept could afford. And even if we add to my self-concept all the properties I'm aware to have, there's even much more to my whatness. It's because self-knowledge infinitely transcends self-consciousness. Self-knowledge is much, much more than self-consciousness or self-awareness. Or because each of us is to himself and to others an infinite source of information, that I can ask, who are you? Who am I? So, in this respect, the question who has the same sense whether one asks it in the first or in the third person. Proof, it takes a life to acquire an even partial knowledge of another person, whereas it takes a few minutes to be acquainted with her or him, to be able to tell her from him, Lynne from Tom. Okay. So, raised in the first question, the who question has one more peculiarity, you've seen it, namely that possible Cartesian self-reference which can deceive us into the illusion of being self-transparent, thus underpinning what I call the crucial puzzle. Namely, although I refer to myself as myself, I can be mistaken about who I am. So, of course, you could object that the who question has two meanings. In fact, the first one, the most important one, is the one I just described. In fact, engaging myself in the research of self-knowledge is, as our entire literary, religious, philosophical tradition testifies, a serious cognitive venture, an exploration reserving true discoveries. The question, who am I, expresses in any case a true desire of further substantive knowledge, further information about the whatness or the individual nature of myself. This desire could not possibly be satisfied by answering, you are you, or you are RDM, or even, you are this person here, not that one there. Think of Ulysses, think of Oedipus, think of Dante's Wayfarer, or Faust, or Macbeth, or King Lear. So, a metaphysical theory of personal identity, of course, could not possibly aim at yielding that individual knowledge that the basic question, who am I, is striving for. or who is he. Yet, a metaphysical theory of personal identity, which aims at being true to life, should give account of the meaning of the basic question, of that meaning actually, which implies a desire of further substantive knowledge. Why can such a question arise? What is there in the being of a person, of any person, that supports such a question? You see, there is a second reading of who, and the second reading is just who is Lynne? Which one of the persons here is Lynne? Okay, but consider, if this were the only meaning, then we wouldn't need a particular interrogative and relative pronoun, who, of course. Which one would be enough? Which one of those glasses is mine own, and so on. So the first reading is really the important one. And in the first reading, I'm asking not what property picks up Lynne instead of Kate, but I'm asking for more about the partially quite visible, but mostly neither visible nor evident individual whatness of, say, Lynne. Scotus would call it, oh, I'm sorry, okay, I should manage. Lynne whatness in her ultima solitudo. I mean, there would be a content there, and a pretty massive one, even if Lynne was left to be the last person, the only person in the world. Okay, so what can we suggest for this Lynne's individuality? Maybe the ordinary word personality. Well, of course, I can say, okay, I'm looking for Lynne's personality, but here everybody would object, aha, that was it. But personality is obviously a psychological, not a metaphysical notion. Okay, but I don't think so, not at least in the usage I make of this word personality. Take the question, who is Socrates? I find there's nothing psychological about this question. I mean, is Socrates the one of Plato's dialogues? Is it the one of Xenophon? Or the one of Aristophanes? Or another one? We know which one, we do know which one of the Athenians of his generation he was. We have all information that an identity card, a pass, could contain in terms of Socrates' circumstances of existence. And yet we are still debating on whom he was really. Even if we couldn't ever know, isn't there a truth of the matter? If you think there is, you need a metaphysics of individuality, if only to argue against postmodern narrative theories of personal identity, according to which, as for the naturalists, there is no truth of the matter, but only a socially negotiated narrative. Now, is modern Haecceity such a theory? No, I claim that no. For Socrates' thisness does not add to Socrates' whatness. Thisness is a non-qualitative property, as we said. But is it a reasonable request to ask for such a theory? One could wonder what has metaphysics to do with personality of people. Isn't that a matter of empirical research? Well, of course, the question about Socrates is a matter of historical research. I agree. But what makes historical research possible? If not the fact that persons do have an individual whatness, an individual nature, a personality, in my sense. So, now I think at this point, I gave up the slides, so I recover my paper, very quickly, and it's better, even better because I have a few minutes left. I think I should manage. Okay. So, a theory of individuality, in my sense, should first specify what essential individuality must contain. And I'm stressing this word, contain. This turns out to be an important technical word in Scotus metaphysics, but this is for another conference. What does such an individuality contain? First of all, essential individuality, call it essential individuality, must definitely include all the circumstances of existence of a given person, origin, time, places of her existence, and therefore all the contingency of her being. For there is an inescapable and dramatic link between individuality and contingency. This link is not all the story, but surely part of it. Lynne's personality is not, I think, not really separable from Lynne's origin, the circumstances of her birth, those parents, and so on, the time and place of her life, including, of course, nationality, language, education, and so on. First class. Second class, we must include all the modes of appearance of somebody, personal physiognomy in the large sense, including bodily and dynamic personality. I mean, I take Lynne's visage and her way to speak and even to walk, essentially belonging to Linneity. There, Lynne could probably disagree, but I do claim that, along with her intellectual and moral physiognomy, her style of behavior, her way of thinking. Of course, this third class of features, intellectual and moral physiognomy or personality, some of which is manifested in her books and choices, and some not, or not yet, is, in a way, the first one we tend to think as constitutive of Lynne's whatness. But now take the first and the last class of features. The first ones are the ones you find on Lynne's past. Let's call them Lynne's extrinsic properties or accident. The second ones could take place in an ideal portrait of Lynne. The second ones, I mean not the third one, the class, the moral and intellectual personality, take place in a monograph on her as an author, where we take off the biographer chapter and the dates and so on. Let's call this third class Lynne's intrinsic properties, like her doctrine, her virtues, and so on. In a way, these two files of information are linked by the photograph on the password. We can adopt the old terminology and distinguish between, as I said, two classes of properties, intrinsic or substantial, and extrinsic or accidental properties. Clearly, these two files of information are logically independent. Quite agree with that. That person with that physiognomy could have a completely different moral and intellectual personality. And yet we feel that they must be somehow connected in the thing itself. How? Now, I claim there is a relation of ontological dependence between circumstances of existence, namely non-qualitative properties, and the whatness of a thing, the thing of its qualitative properties. And this is the idea I want to propose. Intuitively, this relation is obvious in our paradigm case of essential individuality, namely person. Which one? A human person definitely does not barely exemplify humanity. As, say, the tiles of a roof do exemplify the color red. For each person literally personalizes humanity. Each one literally interprets this common nature differently by substantiating, so to speak, humanity. A person individualizes it in all aspects, from the way of walking to the way of loving. She enacts human nature by all her acts in such a way that her individual physiognomy appears at a distance. So, no doubt, I and this cup are alike insofar as our existence is contingent. We both are contingent instances of our specific nature, of course. But while the circumstances of existence of this cup keep being accidental to it, mine own become parts of my whatness. That's the point. And hence essential to me, to my nature, adding to it or further qualifying it. The accident of birth stops being accidental to a person. This is what living as a person is. This is the individualizing nature of a person, so to speak, swallowing up all her contingent properties, making essence out of them, so to speak. So, what we need in our ontology to do justice, I have 2 minutes, I'm finished, to this intuition, is a being capable to transform, if you want, contingency into individual essence, to internalize contingency, so to speak. Once they become part of such an individual, accidental circumstances are absorbed within the foundations of the person's possible futures. And this yields some equivalent definition of personhood, so to speak. A person is a producer of essence out of accidents, of individual essence, of Haecceity. A person is a machine to transform existence into individual essence. A person is a transformer of the accident of birth into a destiny, so to speak. Okay. So what's the alternative? This is all intuitive. In 2 words, what would an alternative theory in formal terms look like? Suppose our informal phenomenological intuition are plausible? No. Now, which would be my formal substitute for Lynne Baker's theory of personal identity in terms of, so in different terms? Interpreting Haecceity as the property of being identical to one particular person may be perfectly compatible with all this intuition I spelled out, but it gives no formal expression to the difference between having and not having what we call an individual nature. The difference between me and a tile exemplifies the redness of a roof. So informally, if somebody were to ask me, is Kate individuality specified by the property of being the same thing as Kate, as modern Haecceity claims, I would say no. For this condition is not key to what it is that is looked for by the basic question, who is Kate? A key to that, to the object of this basic question would be, look for what Kate has done of her circumstances of existence, thus becoming the person she is. But then, what would I say formally? Oh, here at last we may introduce the conceptual key to individual nature. An individual nature is that by which something is an individual. What is this something? It is a kind of unity. Let's call it unity of containment. I practically am quoting Scotus. Scotus has a famous expression, less than numerical unity. This is the unity of a common nature. For example, personhood. Now, what makes personality out of personhood, numerical unity out of less than numerical unity, is a unity of containment that Scotus also calls substantial unity, as opposed to accidental unity. The intuitive idea is exactly the same we have. There is something keeping together all different aspects of Lynne's existence, and this unity is partially accessible to us only by way of what it does, keeping together. Now, as you can foresee, this containing unity or unity of containment is the individuating principle according to me, or the Haecceity. So, how could we represent it more formally? What's the condition to have such a unity of containment? Well, another great metaphysician of individuality suggested the right condition for having Haecceity, probably after reading Scotus. And the idea is that a true individual is such that it enjoys any of its properties, be it a necessary or a contingent one, essentially. I could not be anywhere else than where I am now without being a different person. Now be careful, you will tend to object. If this were true, I could not survive a hardcore cuts, would Lynne say. Now that's the last answer, and then I'm finished. Why do you object that? Of course, because you think of an essential property in terms of logical necessity, therein. That is, truth in all possible worlds. In fact, the only essential property which is logically necessary therein for any individual whatsoever is being the same as that individual, is modern Haecceity. But if such were the case with any property, indeed, I could not survive a haircut. Of course, thanks God, it's not the case. Recall what we said about the link between passport identity and moral intellectual personality. There must be a link, but it cannot be logical equivalence. An individual has all its intrinsic properties and all its extrinsic properties alike in any possible world in which it exists. Nor can it be no link at all, or just extensional equivalence, that is, only in this world that an individual has the intrinsic and the extrinsic properties it has. So, so what about my haircut to cut things shorter? Of course I can survive it. I can survive it because that haircut is within that bond of possible variation of each one of my properties, which my Haecceity allows for. And this is exactly what means for each property to be essential to me. That each property is such a bond on its possible variation, different for each individual. In all those bonds consist what you are, or rather, in those bonds, the very you-ness of you becomes manifest. So as a little conclusion, I could say that, of course, Lynne would survive any sort of haircut. But I would really be surprised if she came across completely shaped, pear-shaped, or with that hair up to her feet. I mean, there would be something which wouldn't be Lynne to me. Anyway, one might make more serious examples, but I do hope that you have grasped the point. And thank you very much for your raw passion. Sorry.
Thank you, Roberta.
We can, if they prefer, you can do it.
Lynne, question. Okay.
Thank you so much, Roberta. That was very interesting, and it seems to me that your complaint about my circular, non-informative theory of personal identity is interesting. And my view is the simple view that no informative, necessary, and sufficient conditions for personal identity over time. that view is really a view, I think, of what I call primitive persistence. It's not a qualitative view. It's not a view that has any that attributes to a person any qualities, whatever. It's simply a formal concept. The concept, your self-concept is just a formal concept. So it's very thin. It's not, of course it's not informative. In fact, what makes me me is I'm this exemplifier of a first-person perspective, and what makes me yesterday is that I was, at that time, that exemplifier of the first-person perspective. I put it rather, in my book, I think I put it rather sloppily when I said your first-person perspective and my first-person perspective. It's not that we have different properties. We share the property of having a first-person perspective because we're all persons. But we are different persons, so we are different exemplifiers of that property. But it doesn't, it's very thin, my idea of personal identity. In fact, it's really just almost a little logical problem of just the sort analytic philosophers usually love, although I don't usually love them. But I think Roberta doesn't like the thinness of that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I made myself clear. My, so to speak, theory would also be formal. Of course, it wouldn't possibly tell you what specific quality you would have. It couldn't be such a numerical condition theory, of course. No, the point is another one. Where is the formal condition, I suppose, I defend? The formal condition is actually ontological dependency between the set, so to speak, of qualitative property and the set of non-qualitative properties, if you want, the set of the circumstances of existence. So this ontological connection between them makes that even those contingent properties, your accident of birth and whatever has been following it, must be sort of swallowed in the notion of you, if you or the whatness, because it's in the thing itself, the whatness of you. This is my formal criterion. I mean, it's informative because it says that in fact, Haecceity in the modern Haeccetistic sense is an empty. It's not just formal; it's empty. It doesn't tell you where you should look for to answer to a particular question. Whereas my criterion says where you have to look for, and exactly it says, well, go and look at what Kate, Lynne, Tom have done with their existence circumstances.
Well,
and this gives you their Haecceity in Scottish sense.
Does your personal identity survive if you suppose you have Alzheimer's and you have a total change of personality, and we start looking for the old Roberta, but the old Roberta we can't find anymore because she's absolutely incapacitated by her dementia.
What is in this case? You mean the upshot of my theory is that if you want the real definition of temporal persistence of a person is anders werden, to say it in German, becoming other. Because of course you keep altering in a way your being, but within a certain bond of variation, possible co-variation. That's why I limited. I mean, it's not all the possible world is not just that possible world, but it's a limited set of possible world, namely the ones which are compatible with the past. The past is no longer accessible, that's it.
Okay, thanks. I thought that was really very, very interesting.
You have a question by investors on the record?
What a wonderful paper. It just was so suggestive and rich. Thank you. I wonder if I could push your nascent theological side. I think there are lots of resources in your view, if I understand the way you're handling SCOTUS here, for the doctrine of resurrection. And what would you think of this? What if you took the classical problems of the resurrection of body, which are as old as the doctrine itself, the problems of the decay of the body and cannibals and fish and so on, and you replace that with this transformation engine, this way in which what is contingent, what is historical, has been taken up into the self and made essential. What if it was these essential qualities that survive in eternal life? What would you think about that?
Look, I really had not thought of this way of looking at the problem. That's quite fascinating. Because in fact, if I'm right, then no matter which point of your life you were to die, a perfect trace of what you've been doing with contingency would be kept in your Haecceity. So that, I mean, God, if He exists, I don't know, He would at least know how to proceed to give you a new being.
Roberta, only one question.
Yeah.
One thing is the criteria of identification of a person. That, that's an epistemological question. How we identify someone. Another one is the individuation of a person.
Absolutely.
That means that you have to find necessary and sufficient conditions for that person to be that person.
Right.
So you had this paradox in which you find out that a posteriori that you are Roberta de Monticelli, something like that, right? So it seems that you said that's a paradox. It doesn't seem to me, using Lynne's character. So you define Roberta as, you know, the person with that particular first person point of view, and then you say, oh, that person finds out that this is Roberta de Monticelli. So something doesn't work. I'm not sure that your being Roberta de Monticelli is really part of your principle of individuation. It's not, because you could find out you are not Roberta de Monticelli. I mean, right? So what I'm saying is, Lynne's definition seems to me to give necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay? They can.
I don't. Frankly, so, I don't object to that. It does. It does.
Yeah. So, but the other things you have said don't appear to me to be necessary and sufficient conditions that give.
Right.
Of the principle of
Unfortunately,
individuation.
I was too late, and I realized that a bit of my paper, but thanks God, is still there, in the sense that I didn't print it out completely, but I tried to remember what was the formal final condition. As I said, if I'm right, in fact, something cannot have personhood without having personality, in my sense, which means essential individuality. No matter whether you know it or not. I'm reconstructing the final formula.
I don't know what personality here means, but certainly it's not a specific personality.
No, as I said, let's take the more formal way. Of course, everything exemplifying any property is an individual, okay? But now, there is a different way of being an individual. For example, a tile of a roof exemplify the red exactly in the same way in which the other tile exemplify the red. And in fact, in this sense, in this world, I could agree that every individual whatsoever is unique, just because in this world it has different, if you want, a different condition of numerical identity. For example, one roof is here, the other is here, and so on. Okay, but now I'm saying if Haecceity is not just the property of being the same as a particular object A, but if Haecceity is, as I said, this unity of containment, namely the, so to speak, law of possible variation of all the contents, namely each property of a thing, be it necessary, be it contingent, can variate only within a certain range, a certain limits, okay? In that case, of course, the thing having this unity of containment has a stronger, so to speak, individuality, which means it's unique not only in this world, but in several other worlds. Now, not all of them. Otherwise, I mean, uniqueness, necessary uniqueness is just of God, so to speak. We are all contingent. So, it would have uniqueness only in a set of words which are exactly the ones compatible with these things past. Okay, that's it. But of course, I also had the slide with the formulas. Thanks God I forgot them. I'll try to provide it for the paper.
Okay, I'm sorry, there is no more time for questions.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so thank you, Roberta.